next speaker is David Loeb. He's a teacher, director, coach, and expert player from the United States. He's also a commentator for The Common Game, and we're very much looking forward to what he has to say about a growth mindset and bridge. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you, Ulrich. I very much enjoyed your talk, and I will be attempting to follow suit with Ulrich in terms of my recommendations. So the focus is on using a growth mindset to learn bridge and to teach bridge. And in terms of the agenda, I'm going to cover the growth mindset, define it, discuss its benefits, and how to cultivate a growth mindset. If time permits, I'll have some recommendations for teachers. But if there's not, and even if there is time to cover it, I will be making sure that I'm sharing my more detailed, longer video, and that will be available to everybody sometime tomorrow. So want to thank you for that. So without further ado, I'll dive in. Carol Dweck is a professor at Stanford University. Her mindset book discusses two types of mindsets, a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. The growth mindset believes that skills and intelligence can be grown and developed, that you are in control of your skills, and by hard work, you can develop and cultivate your skills. People with a fixed mindset view skills and intelligence as set, that they're innate qualities. You either have the ability or you don't. Some people are good at bridge, some people are not, and you're not in control of your destiny, that you can't learn and grow. The neural imaging reflects the key difference that these mindsets have when you're dealing with a problem. So when Ulrich was discussing the importance of allowing people to make mistakes, that the benefit of getting a correction for a mistake is greatly influenced by your mindset. So if you have a growth mindset that you believe your skills can be developed over time, then the anterior cingulate cortex is going to be very active as compared to a person with a fixed mindset. And that positions you to learn and control your impulse. Your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex will also be activated, and that controls your error monitoring and your behavioral adaptation. So your belief that you can learn greatly influences what goes on inside your brain, allowing you to learn more quickly. People with a growth mindset bounce back from mistakes more quickly. With a growth mindset, you see a mistake as an opportunity to learn and to improve. Your neural activity is going to show a greater allocation to attention to the mistake. And as you confront these problems again, you'll demonstrate superior accuracy after the mistake in identifying what went wrong and what can be done to correct it. With a fixed mindset, you view the mistake as indicating a lack of ability. So you have less attention to the mistake, less attention to the correction, and less accuracy after the mistakes. You'll note most of the slides will have a footnote indicating a study that can be read that backs up the information that I'm covering. Brain imaging also reflects how people react to a mistake. With a growth mindset, your attention is focused externally to regulate your sensory and response selection. So that demonstrates that you're more interested in finding out what the correct answer was. Whereas a fixed mindset, the activity in the brain is more with the limbic system that deals with emotional responses. You view the feedback as negative, it threatens your self-perception about your ability, and it doesn't give you the same opportunity to improve. Growth mindsets apply at all ages. You can form new neurons throughout life, and neuroimaging studies show lifelong brain plasticity, meaning that you can develop new neural corrections and new neural neurons as you age. It's not the case that as you age, you cannot learn and continue to progress in your abilities and your abilities in bridge. Recently, I was playing at a club game and I listened to a discussion between a teacher and a director, and they were making some fun of a player who had made a mistake, which is bad enough, but also concerning was their reaction to the mistake, that basically that the player would never improve. You're either born with an ability to play bridge or you're not. They are an example of people with a fixed mindset, and a teacher with a fixed mindset is going to convey that to their teachers. So from their perspective, it's a waste of time to put a lot of effort in for a student that they believe doesn't have the skills to grow because the skills are innate. Another club that I was visiting has a growth mindset oriented teacher that with effort, you can grow your skills. I saw the teacher make comments like, "I like your effort counting the hand," and that allowed you to choose the two-way finesse the best way, and the probability worked out in your favor on this hand. So complementing the process is the hallmark of a growth-oriented teacher that wants to help encourage their students to have a growth mindset and to progress from their errors. And the students at that teachers' clubs, not coincidentally, are progressing. Almost half of the students there are, after many years of playing Standard American, are learning precision, some because they want to play it and some because they want to play better against it. But it just gives you an example of how motivated these students are. Let's contrast the reactions that a growth mindset student might have to going down compared to a fixed mindset student. I'd look for statements like, "What should I have done differently?" Asking the question, looking for feedback, asking what clues were available to choose the winning line of play. Should I have downgraded my hand? Maybe I bid too much. Should I have declined my partner's invitation? What clues were there for that? So all of those indicate curiosity and a desire to improve. A fixed mindset bridge student might say, "I went down because I'm a bad declarer. We got too high because I'll never be good at bidding." You want, as a teacher, to cultivate a growth mindset in your students. You want them to be asking the questions about what I should have done differently. And the way you approach bridge and the way you approach bridge teaching, your communication can help cultivate a growth mindset for them. So one way that you can help students cultivate a growth mindset is to share your belief that abilities can improve with effort. Presumably that's why you're a bridge teacher. You realize that they can improve with effort, and you want to communicate not only is that possible, but that taking on challenges like bridge help you form new neural corrections, which increase your abilities, essentially making you smarter. So it's good for your health, good for your enjoyment of the game, and good for the growth of your abilities. You'll want to back up those statements with studies. So some of the previous slides that I've presented may be useful for you and for your students. There is a good video lesson by another professor at Stanford called "Applying the Growth Mindset." And sharing that video with your students is another way to convince them of the tremendous benefits of approaching any task that they want to improve in with a growth mindset. And Carol Dweck's book called Mindset is also highly recommended. But make sure you're promoting the benefits of having a fixed mindset and exhibit that yourself. When you're discussing hands or bidding or play with your students, try to avoid praising the result. Don't say something like "great play to make 3-no, brilliant lead to beat 4 spades." Instead, praise the process to reinforce the effort that they're putting in and the learning resulting from those efforts. Say things like, "I like the way you analyzed who was the dangerous opponent and worked to keep them off lead. I like how you listened carefully to the auction, assessed how the points were distributed, and you used those inferences to determine a trump lead was needed to reduce their roughing power." So Carol Dweck's book gives many examples of how to use of praise focused on the process rather than the results, and contains many studies that reflect the benefits of that. Encourage your students to challenge themselves. When a feedback occurs, as Ulrich was talking about, love the error. The error gives you a chance to get feedback. Now, you're going to want to, when you're giving feedback, reinforce what they did well, but be process-oriented that. Get feedback on where you can improve. One way to do that is to discuss hands with experts, and I'll be spending a little bit more time on that. But organizing discussions about hands after your games is a great way to improve. When I got started in bridge, playing at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, all of the best players went to a restaurant after the game and went over the hands, and it was a tremendous learning opportunity for all. But make sure as you do this that you're focused on advice on the process, not on the results. Encourage your students to challenge yourself, leave your comfort zone to provide opportunities to learn. One of the reasons we're playing bridge instead of tic-tac-toe is tic-tac-toe is not a challenge. Encourage your students to take on challenges, play up when they can, and the challenges will help them learn. Encourage them to see mistakes or setbacks as part of the process. Setbacks and confusion are part of the learning process. Occasional failures are learning opportunities. So we want you to encourage a growth mindset. One way to do that is with discussions of the boards that have been played. So before the game, invite players to join you after the game to discuss the boards they just played. Suggest players circle boards where they have a question. Advise other players against teaching or criticizing at the table. There's rules against that, but when you provide a forum for discussing the hands with experts, that lessens the need and the temptation for discussing at the table. So make sure they know that we'll discuss those boards after the game. There's no need to do any teaching at the table. After the game, invite players to brag about boards where they did well, reinforce those successes, but from a process perspective, praise the process, not the result. Invite players to commiserate on boards which went poorly, where they made a mistake, and you want to provide constructive advice focused on what clues were available to find the right action, what were the risks and rewards of the options available to you, recognizing the problems they were faced, and also recognizing progress along the way. In fact, just the fact that a student recognizes that an error occurred or that there was a problem is in fact progress. A beginner wouldn't even recognize the mistakes that they were making. So really focus on the mistakes and give constructive advice as to how to improve. It is very important, I'd like to underscore, you don't want teaching to occur at the table. Let them know that they can join you after the game to discuss the hand and learn. The advice that people get from their neighbors at the table will sometimes be wrong, and they will sometimes be result-oriented. So even if they're right, they may be focused on the result, which winds up being demotivating. You want to focus the discussion on the process, which fits into the growth mindset and cultivating the mindset and benefiting from it. So you want to focus on you don't want to focus on what you should do, you want to focus on the why. In terms of your lessons, you should structure those for the growth mindset. So lessons should be focused on why rather than the what. You want to position students to use their reason to determine what they should do rather than just memorization. Emphasize the fundamentals on which bidding and play is based. So the scoring systems, the benefits of a trump fit, your game priorities, the goals that players have during the auction, etc. So when you reviewing those, when you're faced with a bidding decision, for example, you can often work out from first principles what the options you would need to have and what each of the bids mean. You don't necessarily have to memorize everything. Reinforce a growth-oriented mindset in the post-mortem discussions following a game. Again, focus on the process, not the results. You want to position students to reason through the agreements. So the more natural style of bidding you teach, the more easier it is for the students to reason what a bid means. So a call is a good example of a natural bidding system. 2/1 game force is very natural after a game forcing response, but the responder will need to use a 1 no trump response, maybe too often on hands that aren't no trump oriented. But contrast that with standard American yellow card, for instance, where opener often cannot show their distribution because that would create a game force. So a minimum opener can't afford to show their distribution, so they'll need to conceal it and use a default bid, which may or may not have any much to do with their hand, and that deals to a whole set of other problems. In terms of teaching conventions, present the problem a convention solves, present the convention as an intuitive and efficient way to solve the problem. This enables students to reason through the logic of the agreement rather than memorize it. If you look at loebridge.com, we try to present conventions in that fashion. So with support doubles, what is the context, what problem it solves, and there's more. So we highly recommend you adopt a strategy like that when teaching conventions to students. Also, try to avoid teaching agreements that students will need to throw away as they progress. I recently put an article on Bridge Winners, highly recommend that site for teachers and players. But those who are mentoring or playing with advancing students and trying to help them progress will often find themselves in a situation where there's a strange bid or a strange play, and the advancing player says, well, I was taught to do that. Well, some agreements, some simplifications are needed as you begin the game, but those simplifications can be demotivating when you need to throw away the work that you used to learn those. So while there's definitely simplifications that are useful and needed, if there is a better approach that can be easily taught, then don't teach the bad habit. So stolen bid doubles, for example, it's an agreement that you will want to throw away. There's plenty of easy ways to handle auctions rather than when they interfere over your 1 no, rather than using a double as a stolen bid. Help suit game tries are another problem. They tell the opponents where you're weak, where you need help, where you have length. You want to use game tries which ask where help is available, not disclose where you need help. Fast arrival, opposite, and unlimited hand. So there's many of these. The one that got the highest vote is teaching people that they need 6 points to respond. Again, that's not a winning practice in the long run, and no need to be teaching that from the get-go. So just to summarize, a growth mindset promotes learning and resiliency. You want to help students develop a growth mindset by sharing the evidence of the benefits of the growth mindset and your belief that bridge skills can be grown with work. And you want to teach bridge with a growth mindset, praise efforts, not results, position students to use reasoning to choose their bid or line of play, teach a natural style of bidding that's popular in your area, introduce conventions based on the problem they solve. Highly recommend reviewing hands after the game, focusing on the process, and to the extent you can, avoid teaching agreements which need to be discarded. Thank you for your time.
Shireen, you're muted. It had to happen at some point.
It did. Thank you. That was a very interesting session. Many people in the chat are very much liking the praise the process. Maybe we'll see PTP as an acronym in learning journals or amongst teachers. So we have a few questions, and the first one is that do you think that the balance of learning duplicates or supervised practice then is perhaps such that people are not leaving enough time at the end to do the post-game review? Should be playing fewer boards but discussing them in more detail? What would you recommend for a 3-hour experience?
Yeah, I think in general, fewer boards with more time to discuss is beneficial. in some of the games that we run with newer players and advancing players, we'll probably try to limit the number of boards to 21, something in that neighborhood, and that leaves ample time for review. Our local club has a restaurant adjacent to it, so it's really perfect for us. Not everybody can duplicate that, but to the extent that you can have a safe space to discuss the hands, that's highly beneficial.
One question is, do you actually say to someone, like a learner, what a growth mindset is? I mean, would you actually straight out explicitly say, we need you to have a growth mindset and not something else? Or is it passively discussed? Do you ever go obvious on that?
I think it's obvious, but not quite to the extent of saying, we need you to have a growth mindset. I think you can explain your own belief that bridge skills can be learned over time. And because that's a belief that all bridge teachers have, that's why they're doing it. So conveying that belief to your students, I think, is natural. But sharing some of the scientific evidence about, the neural activity, the studies that influence it, I think all of those are good. And as you address mistakes, making sure that you see them, that they know you see them as a learning opportunity, will help them see that.
I have some more questions, a couple more actually. Is one person said, and I think he's referring to that table that you put up about how you explain conventions. Do you think there's a time in your teaching where you're saying, bid this for now, later I'll tell you why you're bidding it? Because there just isn't enough time to explain the entirety of that convention or treatment. Do you find that you postpone the explaining to later? That's what I think the person asked.
Yeah. So we'll typically delay explaining a portion of the agreement. So sometimes it's the continuations. But to give an example of an area where we provide a very simplified approach, would be in reverses, right? We explain to students that a reverse shows a strong hand, and it needs to be strong because if they like your first suit, they need to go to the 3 level, and you could be quite weak. So that's why it's strong, and the first suit is always longer than the second suit. But you wouldn't expect a student early on, or even an intermediate student, necessarily have any good ways to halt the auction and stop in a part score after opener's reverse. So, we explain to them that because you don't yet have a way to stop, we're going to treat the reverse as game forcing. You should recognize that they won't necessarily have 20 points. They may just have 17, but it's more important to focus on finding the right strain. So we're going to treat the auction as game forcing, and then we'll circle back. And when it's an appropriate time in terms of your progression, we'll show you some good ways to tell your partner that you're willing to stop in a part score. And if your partner isn't particularly strong, then they'll cooperate with you and stop below game. So that's an example of that.
I think it's very interesting that you say that, David, because Andrew Robson also shares the belief, don't get hung up about reverses. He said, don't worry about them.
Right.
Right.
You don't want people to make reverses with hands that either don't have the strength or hands that don't have the shape. So, giving them this early understanding nips those 2 problems in the bud, and then later you can show them how to stop before game, and you'll typically want to go to game after opener's reverse. So it's a small price to pay, and it avoids a lot of problems.